Hi, and welcome to the Newbery Chronicles. This is a podcast in which two readers go through each Newbery medal-winning book, and then we talk about it. I'm Michael.
And I'm Rebecca.
And today, we are talking about Dear Mr. Henshaw by Beverly Cleary, the 1984 Newbery Medal winner. But first, a few things. You may remember in a few episodes ago, we asked, would you like to hear about books that we're currently reading that aren't Newbery Medal winners, and nobody said anything.
So we took that as a yes.
Yes. We did not hear anyone complain. And if you start complaining now, it's too late. This is now a feature of the show. The other thing is, don't forget that you can email us feedback at Newbery Chronicles. Wait, is that it?
Yes.
Yeah, newberychronicles@gmail.com. Newbery with one R. Don't forget. The only thing that we won't respond to is if you're complaining about us telling you about the books that we're currently reading. We'll delete those emails straight away. So anyway, before we get to Dear Mr. Henshaw, Dear Rebecca, what are you reading these days?
Well, before I talk about that, I did just want to let everybody know that if you were here for Up Road Slowly, you remember how I started coughing violently in the middle of the episode. And you might also hear that this evening because I have a pretty bad cough. So I apologize in advance, but I'm doing my best.
But it's not COVID this time.
It's not COVID. Or the test said it wasn't.
What you're saying is that one of the things you've been reading are the directions on the NyQuil box.
Yes. But the other good things that I've been reading is I just actually finished Quinta Brunson's collection of essays called She Memes Well. If you're not familiar with Quinta, she has done a lot of things. Most recently, what people are talking about is she is the creator and producer of Abbott Elementary, in which she is also the main character. And she's marvelous. And I'd say, I thought that this was going to be a memoir, and it's kind of like that, but it's more, I don't know, you read Bossy Pants, right?
Yeah.
That's Tina Fey's book. It's similar to that, and she also talks about how much she loved that book in this book. So I feel like she kind of patterned it off of that. Like, it's just a collection of essays and reflections, but it's really funny and cute. And she and I have a lot of same interests in TV shows and Disney Channel original movies and shows. She loves Even Stevens. So anyway,
oh, wow.
That was fun.
It
was a fun book. Yeah, it's a fun book. Right now, I am probably going to finish tonight Elliot Page's memoir called Page Boy. It is very, very good. He is a fantastic writer, has very beautiful prose and insight, and I wish this is one that I was not listening to. I'm listening to it on Libby for audiobook, but I think this would be a great one to read physically because there's a lot of sentences I would want to go back and read again because they're so good. His story is very sad and moving and challenging, but I think he tells it really well. And I hope he's got a lot of good feedback because he's, like in any memoir, you're using a lot of vulnerability, and his journey is one of a lot of vulnerability. So it's really good. And then I'm also reading my first Anne Patchett novel, Bel Canto. So far, it's amazing. I'm not very far into it, but it's very riveting, great prose. And, yeah, I like it. What are you reading, Michael?
Well, I just finished, if we're going to say things that we've already finished, I just finished Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower. Octavia Butler's, I guess, a fairly famous sci-fi writer, although everyone I talk to doesn't know who she is. But in my head, she was famous. Well known as kind of like a Afrofuturist writer, and this novel is not Afrofuturist. Parable of the Sower is about the distant future of 2024, which when she was writing the book in the late 80s, I think that was a bit more of a distant future. But it's a future in which climate change has accelerated to the point that society and kind of social structures people would rely on in another age have started breaking down. America has, become unsafe. People are in poverty because food has become so expensive, and so the remaining communities have to kind of fend for themselves rather than rely on a kind of social fabric that we might used today in like a city or something like that. So it's a dystopian novel, and it's also like this woman's journal. And Octavia Butler's vision for this book, it was planned to be a trilogy. She only wrote 2 of the books, and then she died.
Oh, that's sad.
Yeah, but she took a long time. She died in 2005, and she wrote this book in 1992.
Oh, okay.
So it's kind of like a George R.R. Martin situation, I think, where she didn't like rush to finish it. But what was I going to say? Oh, her goal was that she wanted to take the social issue she saw as like pertinent to the early 90s or late 80s, and then kind of extrapolate what will they be like in the future, and write that from the perspective of not putting any other obviously sci-fi elements in it. So there's no new technology, there's no aliens or any of the things you might expect in sci-fi. It's just she's imagining what will the future be like in like 30 years from now. The other thing that she was interested in is the framework of the book is like at the beginning of each chapter. This is like a journal of this woman, or really like a teenager, and at the beginning of each chapter, there's little quotes from something called Earthseed. And so the other thing that that Octavia Butler was trying to do is, in this trilogy, show how, like, the beginnings of a religion. The girl who is the protagonist, her father is like a Baptist minister, but she is kind of like developing her own ideas about God that are like a little bit divergent from that. And so by the end of the book, you kind of start seeing her start to spread some of these ideas that she's been kind of incubating in her mind. And so Octavia Butler is trying to think about, like, what would a person who becomes a religious figure hundreds of years down the line, as people were reflecting over it, what would she be like? I read this because I thought I might assign it in my AP literature class that I'm supposed to teach here in the fall. And I don't know that it'll work for an AP Lit class. The prose is a little bit like, it's like journals, so it's not like super. It's not meant to be super like, ornate, and there are issues and themes, but it's probably issues and themes that aren't like super conducive to like classroom discussion of like chapter by chapter like you might do in an AP class. I might assign it for like an optional outside of class reading or something like that. Yeah. But I was a little disappointed about that I don't think I'm going to teach it in class. I spent a long time on that, so the other books I'm reading, I'll really quickly go through. I am reading a new-ish 2021 translation of the Gospel of Luke, which is in this larger book called The Gospels, which is kind of this project by Sarah Rudin, who's someone I don't know, like basically making a new translation of the Gospels. She tries to transliterate like the actual pronunciations of names, and she does a few other things too that she thinks are she's trying to do that are unique. She also tries to consider the Gospels in their like original literary form, which is like she points out like has some continuity with like pagan or secular literature of the time, but is also kind of like innovating a new form of like gospel, which is kind of like this mix of religious tract with like biography. At any rate, I found it in the library. It seemed interesting, and our church is going to be doing the Gospel of Luke in the fall. So I was interested in that, and at the same time also picked up the Cambridge Bible Commentary of the New English Bible and their specific volume on the Gospel according to Luke. So E.J. Tinsley is writing this commentary. I'm reading that as I'm reading this new translation. That's from the 60s, so it's kind of like a weird like back and forth where there'll be a footnote and a new one about like, here's what this manuscript says, and then the old one, they don't have anything like that because that manuscript wasn't discovered yet, or that may not have been aware. Or that may not have been something that the commentator was aware of in the 1960s. Lastly, and shortly, because I'm not finished with it, but I'm also reading James Joyce's Ulysses. James Joyce is a really famous Irish author from the early to mid-20th century, really kind of like one of the pillars of what's known as like high modernism, so like Virginia Woolf and like T.S. Eliot and like William Faulkner, and these kind of like experimental writers. And me and a friend are reading through James Joyce's work. Specifically, we wanted to read Ulysses because we had both read the other 2 books before, which are Dubliners and Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. And it's wild. There are long sections where I'm confused and don't know what's going on, and sometimes it's like boring and like too hard to understand. Other times it's really bizarre and interesting. And I'm like 2/3 of the way through it. Probably am not going to finish it by the end of the summer, which was my plan. But I'll finish it one of these days.
You're close.
I'm close. Anyway, that's what we're reading. You'll probably notice if we do this again, Rebecca's things that she's reading change a lot quicker than the things that I read. Because Rebecca is a monster on the Libby app. She listens at 1.5 speed, which I can get behind, except that
I'm also not reading James Joyce.
Yeah, but you did. Don't let Rebecca sell herself short. Like, she read a Virginia Woolf novel earlier this year. Well, and I'm reading James Joyce over several months. So, Rebecca reads at a much quicker pace than I do because she does audiobooks, and I have trouble comprehending audiobooks. So, I'm stuck with the written word. And speaking of the written word, Beverly Cleary wrote a few words.
She wrote so many beautiful words.
Let's transition to Dear Mr. Henshaw. But first, before we talk about the novel, Rebecca, you are going to tell us about Beverly Cleary. And just, I don't know if you're going to mention this, but Rebecca read an entire biography on Beverly Cleary several years ago, so she's kind of exhuming her memories of that novel.
Well,
or that biography. I gave her that biography, by the way. I want to take credit for that.
You did, and it was a beautiful, perfect gift. It was so great. So anyway, let's talk about Beverly. She was born Beverly Atlee Bunn on April 12th, 1916.
She leveled up with her married name.
Okay. In McMinnville, Oregon. She was the descendant of pioneers, which you'll learn about in this memoir that Michael's talking about. Her dad was a farmer, and her mom was a school teacher. She lived in rural Yamhill, Oregon, in early childhood, and that's what her memoir is about. It's about her early childhood. It's called A Girl from Yamhill. She also wrote a second memoir that I'll talk about in a little bit. She was raised Presbyterian. What I will say about that memoir is I don't remember a lot of details of it. I would like to reread it, but I do remember being just as charmed with her work as ever. She writes in her same beautiful style, just telling her stories really well with humorous anecdotes without making them flashy or fancy. Just presenting life with a lot of care and detail and insight, while also mixing in the humor with that. So I remember just being thrilled with that book, and I would like to reread it. When she was 6, there it goes, she moved to Portland, Oregon, where her father started working as a bank security officer. This was a really difficult transition for her. She did talk about this in her memoir. She really struggled in school. And at the school that she was, in first grade, they would, it's called ability grouping, right? Or how you divide people based on their, like, learning development.
Yeah, and if that's like, if that leads to like a path through the grades, you call it tracking.
Okay.
Normally, like, you know, the college track or the vocational track or something.
Well, in that same vein, the first grade was sorted into 3 reading groups, the bluebirds, redbirds, and blackbirds. And she said, I was a blackbird. It's not racist at all, I'm sure. But
there are real blackbirds. We can evoke that bird without the specter of race.
Well, to be a blackbird was to be disgraced.
Uh-oh.
I wanted to read, but somehow could not. She really struggled and was kind of labeled for that. It was hard for her to really get into reading and develop her reading skills, probably because of those struggles, but also she just found the books available to her to be really boring. She didn't understand why people liked to read, and it was just very laborious for her until she discovered The Dutch Twins by Lucy Fitch Perkins, and she found books that were humorous and that were written about really vivid characters, and she really started loving to read after that. And when she was in the 6th grade, she had a teacher that recognized her abilities in writing and really praised her for that, and that kind of really inspired her. She graduated from Grant High School in 1934, and she went to Chaffey Junior College in Ontario, California, which offered lower tuition fees than four-year universities, which was really important because this was during the Great Depression. And after 2 years at Chaffey, she was accepted at UC Berkeley and got her BA in English. She met her husband, Clarence Cleary, at a school
Cleary.
dance.
Oh my gosh. That
And
sounds like a
isn't that
Beverly
cute?
Cleary character.
Sorry, I can't laugh, guys. Just a little bit about them. Her parents really disapproved of her relationship with Clarence because he was Catholic. They were Presbyterian.
Oh my god.
So they eloped in 1940.
That's that UC Berkeley rebellion coming through.
Right. But she graduated in 1939 from the School of Librarianship at the University of Washington with her second bachelor's degree in library science. She was a children's librarian at Yakima, Washington, and she worked there for 1 year. And then she got a job as a librarian at a U.S. Army hospital. She also worked at a bookshop after she became a full-time writer to children. So after World War II, she and her husband settled in Carmel by the Sea, California. This is Carmel by the Sea, California. And this is actually where she died. In 1955, she gave birth to two twins, Malcolm and Marianne. And then she died in 2021 at the age of 104. So before I talk about all of her accolades, and she had a ton, and a little bit more about her career, I just wanted to let people know that another one of our beloved Newbery artists, that's very near and dear to my heart, Kate DeCamelo, wrote a beautiful tribute to Beverly Cleary when she died. And if anyone is interested, I will send that to you because it just warmed my heart dearly. Okay, so when she was a librarian, she found it really difficult to find enough books with characters that the kids could identify with, that she was trying to help find good books. So she just started writing her own. Isn't that the most charming, beautiful thing? It is so sweet. So she just started writing her own about characters that young readers could relate to. And there's a quote I want to read to you. She said, "I believe in that missionary spirit among children's librarians. Kids deserve books of literary quality, and librarians are so important in encouraging them to read and selecting books that are appropriate." And I just think that is fewer truer statements have been said. So her first book was Henry Huggins in 1950, and that was the first of a series that also featured the beloved characters Ramona Quimby and her sister Beezus and his dog Ribsy. Right. I knew it wasn't Ribsby, but I couldn't get it right.
Ribsby.
And she also wrote a series about Ramona and Beezus and their family. She took inspiration for Henry Huggins from the times that she composed stories for children during Saturday afternoon story hours in Yakima. Her 1 year as a children's librarian kind of set her whole trajectory of
Wait, so she
life.
composed the stories for Story Hour?
Isn't that great?
What a chance.
I know. So anyway, her books are mostly about middle-class families. I should specify middle-class white families. That's not specified in Wikipedia, but just from reading her work, I know that's what they're about. Just living their ordinary lives. The majority of her books are set in Grant Park in Portland, and there are apparently many statues and tributes to both Clary and her characters there today.
There's a real Klickitat Street, which is where a bunch of the characters live.
Yeah, and she lived a few streets over from Klickitat Street growing up, and I think she just really liked the name of that street, and she said something really cute about that, but I can't remember what it was. Anyway, there's a lot to say about this woman. She wrote a second memoir in 1995, which I have not read, called My Own 2 Feet, that chronicles her years in college until the time of writing her first book. And in a 2011 interview at the age of 95, she said, "I've had an exceptionally happy career." And 91 million copies of her books have been sold worldwide, making her one of America's most successful authors. So some things that critics really praise and recognize her for are her attention to the daily minutiae of childhood, as well as her use of humor, which I can definitely say that's what me and Michael love about her books. And others have said that her books have lasted because she understands her audience. People said she was decades ahead of her time in terms of the topic she wrote about, her honesty, her accuracy, and her ability to portray real-life children. So, the awards that she's won. She won the Laura Ingalls Wilder Award in 1975. She was nominated for the Hans Christian Andersen Award in 1984. In 2000, she was named Library of Congress Living Legend in the Writers and Artists category for her contributions to the cultural heritage of the United States. She won the National Medal of Arts in 2003. She obviously won the Newbery Award for Dear Mr. Henshaw in 1984. She got Newbery Honors for Ramona and Her Father in 1978 and Ramona Quimby, age 8, in 1982, which I would say are both better books than Dear Mr. Henshaw, but we'll get to that later. She won the 1981 National Book Award for Children's Fiction, specifically for paperback. I don't know why they have to specify that.
Yeah.
But anyway, for Ramona and Her Mother, she won a William Allen White Children's Book Award for a book she wrote in 1973 called Socks.
Oh, I remember seeing that on the library shelves.
Oh, really? Well, we should read it.
It's an Upper Road Slowly situation where, why would I want to read a book about socks? I think Socks is a cat name or something.
Oh, probably. Right. She won the Catholic Library Association's Regina Medal in 1980 and the Children's Book Council's Every Child Award in 1985. So, the last thing I'll say about her is a lot of places in Portland and other areas where she has lived have been named after her. Her elementary school's name, the elementary school where she attended, was changed from Fernwood Grammar School in 2008 to Beverly Cleary School, for example. So I just think those things kind of really speak to her lasting legacy. And that's all I have to say about her, which is a really long author bio. But you should also read her memoirs.
At least the first one.
Well,
we can't vouch for the second one.
But I will read it and report back. Maybe it's on the Loopy app.
Maybe.
Anyway, go ahead.
All right, well, it's now my turn to talk about the plot of this book, which is going to be fairly easy because this book is short, like Summer of the Swans. So, Dear Mr. Henshaw is unlike a lot of Beverly Cleary books in which it doesn't really connect to any of the characters. A lot of her books are about the same characters, or even when they're not about those characters, you will hear references to locations and stuff like that, so you know it's like in the same universe. And unless I missed something, this doesn't seem to be at all connected with Klickitat Street or Portland or anything really that she's written about. It is a book about this kid named Lee Botts, and it's called Dear Mr. Henshaw because there's this guy whose name is Mr. Henshaw, and I am forgetting his first name. I'm not sure if he is given a first name, but he's written this book, this novel called
Boyd
Henshaw. That's a great name. He's written this book called Ways to Amuse a Dog, which is a novel, and Lee Botts really likes it. And he's decided Mr. Henshaw is his favorite author. And so at the book begins with he's given the book by his teacher, I think, and then he decides to write Mr. Henshaw about how much he likes it. And so he writes it, and we never see what Mr. Henshaw's correspondence are back. All we see, the entire text of the book, is just Lee's letters to him. And eventually, Mr. Henshaw apparently suggests, like, why don't you start writing this down in a journal instead of writing to me? Which is, and so we eventually switch to his journal, where he's still writing to Mr. Henshaw, but just pretend Mr. Henshaw. And then he'll occasionally write to Mr. Henshaw for real throughout the book as well. But then probably the majority of the book is his journal. So it's like an epistolary novel. Mm-hmm. But we never see the responses. And
I just looked it up because I have forgotten as well. But this book is set in Bakersfield, California.
Okay. So I guess it's potentially in the same universe as Ramona and all them, just not in the same state. They do mention that in the book, though.
Mm-hmm. I just forgot.
Lee is a boy with a mother that he lives with, no siblings, and his mother has divorced his father, and his father is a trucker, and so he's gone a lot, and he, of course, doesn't even live with them when he's around. And so a lot of the book is Lee being kind of lonely and like missing his dad and being alternately mad at his mom or his dad because they're split up or because of different things that they'll do. And especially like a big arc in the book is him kind of coming to terms with the kind of person his dad is, because he's with his mom every day, but he only sees his dad very intermittently, and his dad is not super reliable. It doesn't seem like he's consistently mailing child support checks. It doesn't seem like he definitely is not always keeping his promises to Lee. He says he'll do this or won't do that, and then he'll kind of not come through with those things. But at least at the beginning of the book, Lee is very he looks up to his dad a lot and misses his dad, understandably, and is kind of mad at his mom. And then there's kind of an arc in the book of kind of starting to understand why his parents divorced. And then at the same time, you have him at school where he seems kind of I don't know, he's in elementary school. So elementary school kids don't always have the same sort of social groups that middle or high school kids would have. But even within that kind of weird elementary school socialization, he seems kind of alone. Mm-hmm. He is picked on a little bit. People keep stealing stuff out of his lunch, and so there's a little arc in the book where he decides he's gonna make an alarm on his lunchbox so that people can't steal stuff out of his lunchbox anymore. And he eventually connects with some friends and through that and gets some credibility in the class because they admire his lunchbox alarm. And he also is starting to be interested in being a writer because of how much he loves ways to amuse a dog. He starts thinking about how he can write his own stories, and so he spends a little bit of time talking about how he's going to start trying to write stuff too. But for the most part, it's like a lot of Beverly Cleary books, which is it's highly episodic with kind of a strong through line of a kind of emotional theme throughout the book. And a lot of it is just kind of observational stuff about what it is to be this particular child in this particular moment. And I would say, unlike a lot of Beverly Cleary books, it's fairly melancholy. It also doesn't have a lot of the kind of hijinks that sometimes Beverly Cleary books did. Rebecca talks about Henry Huggins, and that first book is almost entirely hijinks, right? Every chapter is Henry tries to do something and it goes awry, and he has to kind of scramble to get things back in order. And this is much more laid back than that. It's again just mostly observational stuff about this child as he kind of grapples with some fairly difficult stuff for things that would be difficult for anyone, but especially for a kid, trying to understand that his parents are flawed, or trying to understand that he can only really trust one of his parents, or trying to understand what love is, or trying to understand social class at times, because he and his mom seem to be kind of not they're not destitute, but after the divorce they've kind of downgraded in terms of how they live and stuff. There's a repeated motif of him bringing up they live next to a gas station, and they can hear the gas pump running all the time. There's just little elements like that are kind of indicating social class.
They live in a mobile home.
Yeah, mobile home. Anyway, it's the kind of book that I've spent a lot of time summarizing it, but it's also the kind of book that you don't really need to summarize that much because it's not about plot. It's mostly just about getting to know this kid and watching him kind of develop over the course of a period of time.
Yeah.
What did you like about this book, Rebecca?
Well, another important detail I think to include is that Clary wrote this book because two little boys who didn't know one another had asked her to write about a boy whose parents were divorced, and she had never thought about it but said she'd give it a try, and I think she hits the ball out of the park as always.
The Newbery Medal seemed to think so.
I mean, yeah, gosh, to have that much talent. Anyway, what I liked about this book is Clary is just doing what she does best. I don't love books that are letters. That's just not my epistolary novel. That's not my favorite type of book. But if anybody's going to do it, I want her to do it. I think she does a really good job of capturing a 14-year-old boy's voice and
Wait,
just
he's 14?
Right?
I thought he was much younger.
No,
in elementary
school.
school.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was thinking of the sequel, Strider.
There's a sequel to this
Yeah,
book?
I've read it, but I have forgot that it existed till I was reading the Wikipedia page. She writes a sequel called Strider, which is when he's 14 and starting high school.
So he's in the 6th grade in this book.
Yeah,
so
he's in
that
the
probably
6th grade.
means
He's
like 11 or something.
He's 11.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, that was just an accident. Capturing the heart of an 11-year-old child that doesn't really understand what's going on with his parents, but is very lonely, but finds this book and solace, and doesn't really have any understanding of like social cues or why he might be irritating somebody, and just, I don't know. You also get to see, I like that you get to know about his mom really well, even when we don't hear her directly. But there's this scene that I think is really poignant where Lee is talking to his dad on the phone, and he's already mad at his dad because he has like not called him in a really long time. And so he's just mad at him for not keeping his promises, and mad at him for not being around, and things are just falling apart at school, and he just can't get a handle on things. And then he hears in the background of his dad's call like some boy asking his dad if it said like, "Hey, mom's wondering when we're gonna go pick up the pizza," and that just like breaks him. And so that scene just really stands out in my mind of like, just really well done, how you can see all the emotions that are going on there. It just made me really sad. I think this story is really sad and funny at the same time. I really love the relationship between Lee and his mom, and also Mr. Fridley at school. I think Mr. Fridley's like
Is he the
a
custodian?
custodian of some sort, but he really like notices Lee and pays attention to him, and like lets him come in the morning early to help him get the flags up. Just give him some like responsibility and sense of purpose, because he can tell this kid's really lonely. And I think he's just really sweet. I also really love that you can tell Mr. Henshaw is super irritated with this kid. Like
he doesn't seem like a very cuddly author.
Well, I mean, he teases Lee because the whole premise is that Lee is given this assignment at school that they have to write to one of their favorite authors, and all he does is just write, "Mr. Henshaw, these are the questions about the author. Can you answer them, please?" And, well, they're supposed to do a report about their favorite author. I'm sorry. And so Mr. Henshaw teases him about not doing his own research, and then instead sends him a whole list of questions. And then Lee is mad that he has to answer all these questions because his mom found out and makes him answer them. And so he's just like ragging on Mr. Henshaw the whole time. And then, I don't know, you can tell that when Mr. Henshaw is suggesting he writes this in a diary, it's because he's tired of getting all these letters. But I don't know, I just think it's really funny how you can see that, but Lee doesn't get it the whole time. And I also think it's sweet just knowing that Beverly Clary had a teacher in 6th grade that recognized her and said, you really have a talent for writing, you should keep doing this. And that Lee is also in 6th grade, and at the end, he gets to meet a famous author because of a story that he wrote that gets honorable mention. Originally, he wasn't going to be able to meet the author, but another kid was caught cheating, so he gets to meet her. And he's sad that it's not Mr. Henshaw, but she ends up telling him that how much she loved his story and how he should keep writing. So it was just sweet to me that you can see her in the life of this 11-year-old, and just the value of having trusted adults that see children and recognize their talents and let them know that they do. And I just think that's so important in the life of every single child, to have someone in their life just recognizing their talents and encouraging them to continue. So that's what I liked.
Good. I liked a lot of those same things. I was one of the things that I actually really like about this book, and it's going to sound negative at first, but it's kind of boring at first.
Yes.
But this book does a really great job of like slowly piling up complexities, and it's not like complexities like a lot of novels would have, where it's like plot twists or anything like that, obviously, like since we've already summarized it, but just like the book introduces a very straightforward premise. Like, I'm writing this author, and my parents are divorced, and I don't know how I feel about that. and I'm at school and the kids pick on me. Like very like it could be any middle grade children's book. And as the book goes on, it still could be any middle grade children's book in terms of like what is actually going on, but in terms of how it's actually done, it just gets more textured and nuanced and complex as it goes on until you get to the end of the book, and it's really what's the word? It's like really sophisticated in terms of like what's actually happening in the scenes, and it's not like sophisticated in a way that's transcended the kind of like genre or age group that it's written at, but it's able, because it's like slowly layered on all these things as the book goes on, it's able to deal with some really complex and like very subtly done but very complexly done scenes in ways that are A, like really accessible given the trajectory of the book, but B, like kind of incredible based on how the book starts. Like the last scene of the book is him recounting how the only time we see, if I remember right, the only time that he actually sees his dad within the course of this book, everything else is like phone calls and stuff or postcards. And his dad comes back to the house where they are, and it's this scene where he finally is face to face with his dad, and he doesn't know what to say, and his dad is kind of like awkward, and then it becomes clear that the reason why he's come back to the house is not to see Lee, but to see his mom, his ex-wife, because he says he's lonely and wants to get back together. Oh, I think about you at nights and whatever, and his mom just rebuffs him and says, no, I can't do that anymore. And Lee, understands. And I think that, us as adults understand that, it's more or less a booty call, that he's coming back. But even, through the perspective of a child, the way that the book has progressed, that interaction makes sense, and it makes sense to Lee. And the fact that it makes sense to Lee in that scene, they're not really saying a lot, but the way that it describes the their interactions is done in such a way that you can infer so much stuff. He leaves, and this is the last paragraph of the book. After his dad leaves, let's see. When I went inside, Mom was sipping her coffee and sort of staring into space. I went into my room, shut the door, and sat listening to the gas station go ping, ping, ping. Maybe it was broccoli that brought Dad to Salinas, which is where they live. But he had come the rest of the way because he really wanted to see us. He had really missed us. I felt sad and a whole lot better at the same time. And that's it.
Yeah.
That scene ends, and it doesn't really explain. It doesn't explain what his mom is feeling. It just says she's staring into space. It has him feeling this ambivalence at the end of the book. But it doesn't feel like you're being left off with well, what was the point of that scene? It's this very pointed scene that doesn't really explain itself, except that it does through exclusively telling or showing stuff, showing how these characters interact. And I just think it's really great how the story eventually is doing that, because at the beginning it's very simple. Dear Mr. Henshaw, I'm in class. Here's the first page. Dear Mr. Henshaw, my teacher read your book about the dog to our class. It was funny. We licked it, which is a misspelling of liked it. Your friend, and friend is also misspelled, Lee Botts, and then parentheses is boy. That's how the book begins, and that's kind of the tone is at the beginning. And then as he shares more and as he experiences more, it just snowballs into something that's it's not bigger than what it begins as. It just is deeper and more shaded in. And I just think it's really tremendous how it does that. The way that it builds is as complex and as insightful about these characters as any adult fiction book would be.
Yeah.
Um,
I also really like that it centers around his love and appreciation for a funny book that begins this whole journey. And then later on, he talks about another book that he reads by Mr. Henshaw that is he thought was going to be funny and ends up not being at all. But he understands how it's important to write different kinds of stories and to learn and grow from those. And I love that this is a book about a kid growing up in a difficult situation, like reading and just processing through writing. I just think she does that really well. Like she praises her own art form without being like on the nose about it.
right. And I think that she's also, again, within the constraints of a very identifiable, like, age group and type of novel, like, she's able to make things, like, surprising without being, like, without violating the kind of rules of, like, what these sorts of books are supposed to be like. So, like, for example, the little plot about kids are stealing stuff from his lunch, like, that builds to...
Man, I was mad for him.
Yeah, like, I mean, his daily, like, his lunch, like the cookie out of his lunch gets stolen.
Well, and his mom works for a catering company, so he has really special treats in his lunch.
Right.
That keep getting stolen.
And, like, that's, but he learns, he teaches himself how to make a little, like, electronic alarm, and...
With the help of the guy in the hardware store.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah. And, the thing that you expect this to be building to is, like, oh, he's going to find out who it is, and he's going to, like, have a big moment where he gets to stand up for himself to this guy who's been, like, bullying him. And we don't know, he doesn't know who it is, and we in the book don't know because we're all in Lee's perspective. But what it really builds to is this moment where all the kids are really intrigued by Lee's lunch alarm, and they want him to build ones for himself, and he connects with the kid because he goes over to this other kid's house, and they try to build an alarm for his door because this kid's sister is always getting into his room and all that. And then the school gets really irritated that all these kids have lunch alarms because they're all kind of, like, annoying because they're really loud, and they just said, like, nobody don't do lunchbox alarms anymore. And that's how it ends. And Lee is like, well, I never caught the person, but it would have been kind of awkward to have to spend the rest of the year in class with this kid that had been stealing all my lunch. And so, like, it builds to a satisfying conclusion in the sense of he gets something out of it. He gets a new friend. He gets kind of, like, again, like I said, credibility in his class. And
whoever was doing that was probably scared and didn't do it again. So
right,
it's like...
but it also doesn't... It's surprising, It has this, element of, like moment of maturity where he realizes, like, it actually is better that I don't know who did it.
Right.
It's, which, is really kind of, it's a very, again, like, sophisticated way to do it without, like, being something that's, like, really, because a lot of times, when you're trying to subvert expectations, you can also kind of subvert the kind of, like, pleasure that comes from, like, traditional story structures and stuff. And that's not what's happening. She's just finding ways to make the story surprising in little small ways, while still kind of feeling like you're being paid off.
Yeah.
Did you not like anything about this book?
I did. The only thing that I didn't like is everything you were saying about the last scene is true in its goodness. I think that conversation the dad has with the mom in front of Lee is both very awkward and very unrealistic. I feel like, so basically they're sitting in the living room and they're drinking coffee and Lee's in there the whole time and the dad's like, so are you going to come back to me? Talking to the mom, I would have much preferred, and I think it would have made a lot more sense if Lee had been in another room and had overheard this conversation, or like had that scene where you overhear the conversation at the car before the person leaves. It just made me feel awkward to think about this kid just sitting in the room while the dad is, like, overtly asking the mom, like, you get back together with me. I don't know. That's the only complaint that I had, though, which is very minor. I think the scene is done well. I just feel like it would have been better if he had just, like, observed that conversation from, like, not been in it.
I think for me that works
Yeah.
as realistic to me because, again, throughout the book, Lee is kind of realizing how little, like, how careless his dad is.
Yeah.
And, like, realizing that maybe his dad, cares about Lee on some level, but not enough to actually follow through on the things that he says. And, like, I don't know, I already mentioned this, but, like, I think one of the things that's kind of powerful about that scene is the way that it becomes apparent that what the dad cares about is the mom, not Lee.
Right. But I'm saying,
And I think that, like, the fact that he has that conversation, he initiates that conversation in front of Lee with his mom, like, he's not even thinking about Lee being there. Like, it's just, like, another, affirmation that, like, this dad, doesn't really know how to be a dad. Mm-hmm. To the point that, like, he acts as if he's not a dad a lot of times. And I don't know. I understand what you mean, but I also think that it worked for me because of what it showed about the dad, that he would have that conversation just right there.
Right.
And it appears that he's not even at the house very long. Like
they just maybe eat dinner with them. They don't even finish their coffee.
He comes, he's like, will you come back to me? And she's like, no. And he's like, okay. And he leaves. Like, that's all. He doesn't spend time with
the dog.
He doesn't, though, because Lee at the end says, you should keep the dog.
That's right.
He's had a dog this whole time. The dad has, and he loses him for a minute, and Lee's been really mad at him for that, and he comes back. But I don't know, there's something really stark and about that, how the dad really came just for one reason, and when he found out that reason wasn't going to happen, he left. He didn't stay and spend extra time with Lee.
Right.
And Lee is at peace with that at the end of the book.
It just makes me so sad.
He finds a sort of he's not happy about it,
right?
But he finds a way to, like, have contentment with the kind of man his father is.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think that last scene really works well because of that.
Yeah. Was there anything you didn't like?
Okay, the one thing it's not like I strongly dislike it. Well, one, I already said that I think the beginning of the book is a little boring, and I like that the arc makes it more complex, but I still don't think the beginning of the book is super engaging. The other thing is the janitor who's at the school. Like, he's kind of a type, like the kind of, like, kindly old man who takes interest in this lonely kid or whatever and is always just, like, dispensing advice. Like, unlike a lot of characters in the book, he never becomes anything more than just, like, a stock character. And that would be fine if he was in, like, one or two scenes, but he's, like, a fairly major part of the book.
I think he's sweet.
He is sweet. I mean, this is the stock character is, like, a sweet old man who's a little bit rough around the edges, but he's got a heart of gold, and he takes a shine to this young kid who's, lonely, like, and dispenses wisdom and helps him, but also, like, is, serious about, like, life struggles. And, like, it's not that he's, like, bad, but those were the moments where I felt like I was verging into, like, oh, I've seen this movie, and this is a movie. And he felt like a character from a book that was much less thoughtful than Dear Mr. Henshaw. I don't know. I didn't really like his character. I didn't dislike him, but he just doesn't. He didn't have the nuance or the resonance of a lot of the rest of the book. Yeah. I didn't think. So yeah. Otherwise, like we've both read this book before, right?
Yeah.
But I had not since grade school.
It's been a long time.
Like, I read a ton of Beverly Cleary books in elementary school, and honestly really have not read very much Beverly Cleary since. But I read a ton of her books in grade school, and this is one of them I read. I remember liking it, but I didn't remember anything about it except that it was letters and that his dad was gone. And so I was glad returning to it that I liked it, because when I first started reading it, I was like, oh man, this is kind of boring. Maybe I was wrong as a kid.
Yeah. No, I think it's great. 2 thumbs up.
2 thumbs up. So is that 4 thumbs up, 2 thumbs from both of us?
Yeah, I guess so.
All right. Well, do you have any other thoughts on Mr. Henshaw?
No, you should read it, and you should read really everything that she's written. So Michael doesn't like her books that she wrote for teeny boppers, but I think they're fun. So,
When you say I don't like them,
never,
what you mean is I've never read them and they don't seem appealing to me.
I don't think you would like it. I loved Gina Johnny, but I don't know that you would like it. Anyway,
I do think like this is an author that we've read a ton of books from, which is not normal for this podcast because a lot of these authors we're not familiar with outside of it,
right.
Or we are familiar but we've not read a ton of their books. But you and I both have read a lot of Beverly Cleary books, and I will say that, like, you mentioned this already, but this is not her best book. And it kind of feels like there's this thing that happens with artists where a lot of times they'll get major awards for work that's later in their career, that's maybe not their most iconic work or their best work, but it's almost like, well, we have to give them an award for something, and here's a good thing that they wrote recently. And so they get, like in movies, like Martin Scorsese winning an Oscar for The Departed. It's not like The Departed is bad, but after having done Goodfellas or Taxi Driver or all that sort of thing, winning it for The Departed feels like strange. And that's a little bit what it feels like with this book, although at the same time, this book is more serious and somber than some of her other books. And so
I think the fact that this is not our favorite of hers and we still love it so much kind of speaks to how great she is.
Yeah, and I think that
and
also...
how, like, she says, like, I don't really know how to write about a boy whose parents are getting divorced, but I'll give it a try because two boys asked me to. That's the most beautiful gift to give someone is, like, I'm going to try my best to write a story that speaks to your experience and does it so well.
Yeah, and what I was saying is it's not a comic novel, which a bunch of her books, most of her books that I've read are comic on some level, where it's like kids getting into mishaps or doing like kind of silly things, and like those are all really well observed and good too, but like they're not like serious in the way. And so I'm wondering if like this sort of book that like we've talked about is kind of melancholy and you know focuses on issues a little bit more. Maybe that was one of the reasons why it kind of gravitated. Because like the other book she won, like Ramona and Her Father, that's one of the more serious Ramona books because her dad like loses his job in that one, and so that got an honor medal, right?
And Ramona Quimby, age 8.
I don't remember what's in that one, but
I don't either. It's good.
But again, like it's kind of the paradox of being an author who's so like good at making books that are lighthearted. You know, it doesn't mean that they're worse, but they're the sort of books that don't always scan as important. Whereas Dear Mr. Henshaw, it's like, oh yeah, this is a serious, realistic book about divorce.
Yeah.
Anyway.
One last thing I'll say about Beverly Cleary, I just found out in the research we did this evening, is that PBS did a special on her, like for her 100th birthday. No, it's not PBS. It was broadcast on PBS, but the Oregon Public Broadcasting produced an original half-hour program discovering Beverly Cleary. So I'd love to find that because it has a really extensive interview with her. She was 99 at the time, and it's in her home in Carmel, California, and has photographs and stories from her life. So anyway, that'll be interesting to track down if anybody can.
Yeah, I don't really know a lot about her life, so I'd like to watch it. Well, we've been going almost an hour.
Yeah.
Last few episodes were short. This episode's long. So I'm sorry for people, a.k.a. my mother, who don't like it when our episodes are longer. Speaking of my mother, you too can be like my mom and email us at newberrychronicles@gmail.com. Now that we're done with this episode, you may have some thoughts on this that you want to tell us. Maybe you too are reading Elliot Page's biography or are looking at biblical commentaries. Maybe you hate the way that we've done this. If so, let us know. Also, you may have noticed last time we teased it and we put it into the mixing of the final episode, but we have theme music now, done by our friend Jake Ward. So be sure to check out Jake Ward's Bandcamp page, where he just has like one album, but the guy makes music and does music besides just that one album. I don't know where you can find that. I'll have to ask him. But yeah.
And then our next book.
Yes. So, Dear Mr. Henshaw, 1984, we were moving into the 90s again.
Woohoo!
The 90s, people were in flannel, rocking, TLC and all that sort of stuff. We are going to be reading a book that probably doesn't have TLC in it because it's from 1992. Shiloh, that's the next book that we're going to be reading, 1992 Metal Order. Yeah, I've not read it. Have you?
Nope. Seen the movie 10,000,000,005 times, but
I've not seen the movie either. So, looking forward to that. Anyway, that's what's next time. Anything else?
thanks for listening.
All right. Goodbye.